In the previous movie, you just took your eyes away from the mysterious stone arrangement at the bank of the pond in one of the most ancient Japanese gardens, the reconstructed Tôin garden at the site of the 8th century imperial palace in the city of Nara. Let us now cross the curved bridge and continue our walk behind the pavilion. A small, inconspicuous brook meanders in the distance. Far not a usual brook, of course, because during the excavations some sake cups were found at its bottom. These sake cups mean that the exquisite stream meanders its way with the pride of noble memories, memories of courtiers sitting on its banks for a very interesting game. In the 4th century China, during a day of the traditional purification ritual on the 3rd of March, a nobleman of one of the prominent families, the Xia clan, invited 42 famous for their poetry courtiers to his garden called the Orchid Pavilion. He had modified the stream of the river flowing through the garden to meander in a way that permitted each guest to have some private space on the bank. And when everyone was comfortably sitting by the stream, the servants floated down tiny boats with cups full of rice liquor. Liquor was highly appreciated by Chinese intellectuals, but here the rule was to drink only in the case one could not compose a poem before the cup passed their spot. Many a poem was written then, and many a cup was dried up. This game was described in the preface of the collection of their poems. Yet, that was not the first time such a poetic competition was held. It probably began during the 3rd century in a garden near Loyang called the Golden Valley. And we know about it from yet another garden, the Garden of the Peach and Plum Blossoms, where in the 8th century the famous poet Li Bo invited his cousins for the curious game, giving the following instructions. May those who cannot compose a poem be punished by drinking, according to the rule of the Garden of the Golden Valley. The Golden Valley, the Orchard Pavilion, the Garden of Peach and Plum Blossoms. These three Asian gardens, as well as their poetic game, became models for many a garden in China. And the Japanese courtiers, always eager for exotic ideas, adopted the game as soon as they heard of it. The ancient records Nihon Shoki or Nihongi inform us that the Emperor Kenzo from the 5th century too had hosted a poetic gathering in the backyard garden Koen of his palace on the day of the ceremonial purification, the 3rd of March. Note here that the game was held in the backyard garden Koen. Not many illustrations can be provided about the gardens of the imperial palaces in Japan, but let me use here a possible reference of one of the most ancient such gardens, those of one of the first imperial palaces in Japan, the so-called Palace of Asuka. Only its southern pond is considered for restoration, yet it seemed to have had a northern pond too, the two being connected by an earthen bridge. Neither of them, though, is directly in front or behind the northern and the southern halls of the palace, so let us just use it as a rough image for the following concept. In ancient Japan, the main garden of the palace was called lake, ike in Japanese. It had a lake or a pond and was situated in the southern court of the palace, the south being the direction of the yang, the male and positive principle according to the Taoist geomancy feng shui. That was, thus, the garden of the emperor and a sign of his authority. In the beginning, most probably, that garden did not have an island in the pond, only a comma-shaped small lake. On the contrary, the backyard garden, with healing plants and even vegetables, was set in the north part of the palace. The north was related with the yin, the negative, and the feminine. That was the garden of the empress. And when the aristocrats also began to construct gardens in their residences, these gardens were called island, shima, after the island edified in their ponds. Such strict rules presided over the architecture of the so naturally looking nowadays Japanese gardens. Yet, whatever the place and the rank of the garden, the game of meandering brooks found its way there. Emperors and courtiers loved it. Not only that there are numerous paintings of it, but there are places which stage it even nowadays, like the shrines Jonangu and Tenmangu in Kyoto, the temple Motsuji in the city of Hiraizumi in the north of Japan, and so on. So look at this little stream and imagine elegant courtiers, some of those whose names we see in the first Japanese poetic anthology, Manyoshu. Sake cups floating down the stream, slightly directed by the long sticks of servant boys. The poets pronounce their verses or stretch a hand to take a cup that has just passed and drink its contents. Did they compose she poems in the Chinese style or uta in the Japanese? Courtiers in ancient Japan were skilled in both. And now the circle is complete. We have come back to the starting point of our walk after having meandered our way into the meaning of the basic elements of this garden. I hope that now you will be able to recognize the ocean in the glistening lake with the island of immortals in other Japanese gardens too. See the universe in the stone of Mount Meru and the ambitious carps jumping up the jutting stones of the breakers arrangement. Hear poems when you see a meandering stream. And after a cup of your favorite drink, be it some alcohol, tea, or fresh water, I will tell you more stories because Japanese gardens have preserved them in plenty. Be well and safe.